The $80,000 engagement ring sat untouched on the leather passenger seat, but Marcus Kane wasn't thinking about the woman waiting for him at the five-star restaurant downtown. He was staring through his windshield at something that made his blood run cold. A little boy with brown eyes exactly like his own. The child stood 50 feet away in Riverside Park, laughing in the arms of a woman Marcus thought he'd never see again. And in that single frozen moment, Marcus realized with devastating clarity he was about to propose to the wrong woman. Because 3 years ago, he'd walked away from the right one, and she'd been carrying his child. But to understand how a millionaire CEO ended up paralyzed at a red light, his entire future crumbling before his eyes, we need to go back to the man Marcus used to be, back to the choices that seemed so right at the time, back to the day he decided that love was a liability he couldn't afford. This is the story of how one glance through a car window destroyed everything Marcus thought he knew about his life, and how a child he never knew existed would teach him what it truly means to stay. Before we dive deep into this journey, if you believe in second chances and the power of redemption, subscribe and stay with us. This story will challenge everything you think you know about love, responsibility, and what it means to be a father. Don't miss a single moment. Marcus Kane believed in momentum. As the 36-year-old CEO of Kane Dynamics, a tech consulting firm that had grown from a basement startup to a $200 million empire in just 8 years, he'd built his entire philosophy around forward motion. Hesitation was weakness. Looking back was failure. Regret was something other men indulged in, men who didn't understand that success required sacrifice. His penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan. His garage housed 3 luxury vehicles. His name appeared regularly in Chicago Business Weekly, always accompanied by words like visionary, ruthless, and unstoppable. Marcus wore his reputation like armor. He did not dwell on mistakes because he'd learned early that every misstep was simply data, information to be processed, analyzed, and converted into strategy. Emotions were variables to be controlled, not indulged. Love, when properly managed, fit into his life like every other calculated risk. When it didn't fit, it became expendable. That October afternoon felt like vindication. Everything was moving according to plan. The Chicago skyline passed outside his Mercedes, all glass and steel and autumn light filtering through the buildings in golden slants. Rush hour traffic hummed with its usual impatient rhythm. Marcus's phone rested face down in the console, deliberately ignored for the first time in weeks. Tonight was important. Tonight required focus. The velvet box on the passenger seat seemed to radiate significance far beyond its size. Inside it rested a ring he'd spent 6 weeks selecting, not because he doubted his choice, but because Marcus Kane did not tolerate imperfection in anything that bore his name. The woman waiting for him at Aubergine, the most exclusive French restaurant in the Gold Coast, was exactly what he needed. Victoria Ashford, elegant, ambitious, emotionally stable. She came from old money, understood business, and, most importantly, she never asked Marcus to be anything other than what he already was. She never demanded he slow down. She never questioned his priorities. She never made him feel like he was choosing between his empire and his heart. Not like... Marcus crushed that thought before it could fully form. He'd become exceptionally good at that over the years. As he drove, his mind moved through the evening's logistics with military precision. The reservation was at 7. He'd arrive at 6:45, order her favorite wine and propose during dessert when the restaurant's ambiance reached its peak. He'd rehearsed the words enough times that they no longer sounded emotional, just correct, polished, exactly calibrated to land with maximum impact. Control had always been his version of safety. Love, when it fit neatly into plans, was acceptable. When it didn't, it became a threat to everything he'd built. The traffic light ahead turned red near Riverside Park, a stretch of green space Marcus barely registered anymore. It was just part of the landscape, background noise in a city he'd conquered one calculated move at a time. He eased his foot onto the brake, his gaze lifting absently toward the trees and worn benches beyond the sidewalk. Children's laughter drifted faintly through his closed windows,
distant, irrelevant, part of a world Marcus had long decided did not intersect with his own. Then his eyes caught on something, and the world stopped. At the edge of the park stood a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, her posture relaxed but protective. She wore jeans and a cream sweater, nothing remarkable, nothing that should have made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. But it did, because he knew that silhouette. He knew the way she shifted her weight when holding something precious. He knew the exact angle of her profile when she smiled. Sophia. The name crashed through his mind like thunder, bringing with it a cascade of memories he'd spent 3 years carefully burying. Sophia Chen, the woman who'd walked out of his life without explanation. The woman he'd convinced himself had left because she wanted something he couldn't provide. The woman he'd written off as a mistake he'd been lucky to escape. For a split second, Marcus's mind offered excuses. Someone similar, a coincidence, memory playing tricks. But the longer he looked, the less room there was for denial. It was her, and she was holding a child. The child couldn't have been more than 2 years old, his small frame nestled comfortably against Sophia's shoulder as he giggled at something only he understood. His tiny hand gripped her sweater, his head turning to look at the park with unmistakable curiosity. Then the child shifted position, lifting his head just enough for Marcus to see his face clearly. And Marcus's entire world tilted off its axis. Brown hair that caught the light exactly like his own. Brown eyes, serious and observant even in laughter. A small nose, a determined chin, features that were undeniably, impossibly familiar because Marcus had seen them every morning in the mirror for 36 years. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, not from fear, from recognition. From a truth so devastating it took his breath away. If this story is gripping you already, imagine where it's headed. Hit that subscribe button now, because what Marcus does next will leave you speechless. Trust me, you don't want to miss this.
Marcus's mind, trained to process complex data in seconds, began running calculations it had no business running. 2 years old, which means 3 years ago, Sophia had still been in his life. 3 years ago, they'd been together, sleeping in the same bed, sharing the same space, existing in that precarious balance Marcus had told himself was happiness. 3 years ago, she'd disappeared. No dramatic fight, no ultimatum. She'd simply left, packed her things while he was at a conference in San Francisco, left a note that said, "I can't do this anymore," and vanished from his life with surgical precision. He'd called twice. She hadn't answered. Marcus had told himself it was for the best, that she'd probably found someone else, someone who could give her the simple life she'd always seemed to want, someone who came home at reasonable hours, who didn't treat every conversation like a negotiation, who actually noticed when she was upset instead of offering solutions before understanding the problem. He'd convinced himself that her leaving was proof their relationship had been doomed from the start. He'd never once considered, dear God. The timeline arranged itself with brutal efficiency. She'd been pregnant when she left, and she'd never told him. The horn behind Marcus blared, loud and insistent. The light had turned green. Cars were moving around him, drivers shouting curses he couldn't hear through the roaring in his ears. Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. Every instinct screamed at him to drive forward, to continue to the restaurant, to the proposal, to the future he'd so carefully architected. That was the logical choice, the safe choice, the choice that protected everything he'd built. But Marcus couldn't move, because across the street, 50 feet away, stood a child who had his eyes, his son. And for the first time in 8 years, Marcus Kane made a decision that had nothing to do with strategy, nothing to do with protecting his empire, nothing to do with the careful calculations that had guided every choice since he'd started his company. He pulled the car sharply to the curb, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the Chicago afternoon. The velvet box with the $80,000 ring remained on the passenger seat, forgotten, meaningless. Because the future Marcus thought he was building had just revealed itself to be a lie.
and the past he thought he'd escaped was about to demand answers he'd never prepared for. Marcus crossed the street with a strange sense of detachment, as if his body had disconnected from his mind entirely. The sounds of traffic faded to a dull hum. The voices of passers-by became indistinct murmurs. Even the crisp October air felt distant, pushed to the edges of his awareness. Every ounce of his focus locked onto Sophia and the child in her arms. She hadn't noticed him yet. She was pointing at something in the trees, her voice carrying faintly that same warm, patient tone Marcus remembered from mornings when she'd been happy, before everything between them had grown cold and transactional. The boy followed her gesture with intense concentration, then erupted into delighted laughter. The sound pierced Marcus's chest like a blade. How many moments like this have I missed? How many first words, first steps, first discoveries? Sophia noticed him when he was still 15 feet away. At first, her expression remained neutral, almost absent, the way people look at strangers who aren't quite close enough to acknowledge. Then recognition settled in, and Marcus watched her entire body language shift. Her eyes widened, not with surprise, but with something closer to resignation, as if she'd known this moment would come eventually, as if she'd been preparing for it. She straightened instinctively, one arm tightening around the boy, the other resting protectively along his back. Her posture became a shield. Marcus stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure how to proceed. For a man who'd negotiated million-dollar deals without hesitation, who'd faced down hostile investors and cutthroat competitors without flinching, this moment paralyzed him completely. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 years of unasked questions and unspoken truths. Marcus searched her face desperately, for anger, for accusation, for any emotion that might tell him how to navigate this. He found none of it. Sophia looked calm, almost detached, as if she'd already processed this confrontation in her mind 1,000 times. "Marcus," she said quietly. Hearing his name in her voice again hit him with unexpected force. It sounded different now, stripped of affection, grounded in reality rather than memory, neutral, guarded, final. He swallowed hard. His gaze drifted to the child despite every instinct telling him not to stare. The boy had turned to look at him now, his curiosity unfiltered and direct. Those brown eyes, his brown eyes, studied Marcus with an intensity that made his throat tighten. The resemblance was undeniable up close. Every feature confirmed what Marcus's instincts had screamed from across the street. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't imagination. This was his son, and Sophia had kept him hidden for 2 years. Subscribe now if you want to witness what happens when a man who controls everything loses control of the one thing that matters most. The next chapter will break your heart. I promise.
How old is he? Marcus's voice came out rougher than he intended, barely above a whisper, as though speaking any louder might shatter whatever fragile reality he was clinging to. Sophia hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but Marcus caught it. That tiny pause where she made a choice about how much truth to give him. 2.5, she answered finally. The number landed like a physical blow. 2.5 years. 912 days, 21,888 hours. Marcus's mind, trained to calculate, couldn't stop running the numbers even as his heart cracked open. 2.5 years of birthdays I missed. 2.5 years of goodnight kisses I never gave. 2.5 years of a child growing up without knowing my name. The timeline assembled itself with devastating precision. 2.5 years ago, Sophia had already been gone for 6 months, which meant, "You were pregnant when you left," Marcus said, not as a question, but as a statement that demanded acknowledgement. Sophia's expression didn't change, but her arm tightened imperceptibly around the boy. "Yes. And you never told me." "No." The simple honesty of it, the complete lack of apology in her tone, stunned him more than anger would have.
Marcus felt something inside him splinter, not cleanly, not mercifully, but in jagged pieces that cut on their way down. Marcus started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence because giving it words made it real, made it undeniable, made it something he could no longer rationalize away. "He's beautiful," he said instead, the words escaping before he could stop them. For the first time, Sophia's guarded expression softened just slightly. "His name is Elijah," she said quietly. "Eli, for short." Elijah. Marcus repeated the name silently, testing how it felt in his mind. It was strong, classic, meaningful. Exactly the kind of name he would have what? Would have chosen? He hadn't been given that choice. He hadn't been given any choice at all. Eli continued watching Marcus with that serious, thoughtful expression, as if trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. Then he reached up to touch Sophia's hair, a small, unconscious gesture that spoke volumes about their bond. They had routines, inside jokes, a whole private world Marcus had never been part of. Marcus began, then stopped again, unsure how to ask without revealing just how desperately he needed the answer. Sophia understood anyway. She always had been able to read him better than he could read himself. "He knows he has a father," she said calmly, her voice carrying neither cruelty nor comfort, just fact. "He just didn't know it was you." The words hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. Didn't know it was you. As if Marcus had been nothing more than a theoretical concept, an absent variable, a man-shaped hole in Eli's life that could have been filled by anyone. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, the weight of that truth pressing down until he could barely breathe. All those years he'd believed that absence was a kind of protection, that not being involved was better than being involved badly. The children needed stability more than they needed fathers who didn't know how to stop working long enough to care. Standing here now, looking at a child who carried his DNA but not his name, Marcus understood with painful clarity. He'd been lying to himself the entire time. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out harder than Marcus intended, edged with something between desperation and accusation. Sophia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, she looked away toward the park where other children played under the watchful eyes of parents who hadn't missed 2.5 years of their lives. When she turned back, her eyes held something Marcus had never seen in them before. Not anger, not resentment, exhaustion. The kind that came from carrying weight alone for so long you forgot what it felt like to share it. "Because when I tried to talk to you back then, you didn't listen," she said, her voice steady but laced with old pain that had calcified into fact. "You had already decided what my silence meant." Marcus felt the accusations settle around him like chains. He remembered those final months with Sophia, if remembered was even the right word for something he'd barely paid attention to at the time. He'd been launching the Kane Dynamics expansion into the West Coast market. 80-hour weeks became 90, 90 became 100. He slept at the office more nights than he slept at home. Sophia had grown quieter. He'd noticed distantly, the way you notice background music changing in a restaurant. She'd tried to talk to him, he remembered that much. Vague recollections of her starting sentences he never let her finish, of conversations he'd postponed because there was always something more urgent demanding his attention. "We need to talk. Can it wait until after the board meeting?" "Marcus, this is important." "Everything is important right now, Sophia. Just give me 2 weeks." Except 2 weeks had become 4, 4 had become 8, and then she was gone. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," Sophia said, her tone still measured but firm. "I left because I realized I was alone in something that terrified me, and I knew I couldn't carry it and fight you at the same time." Fight you. The word stung more than Marcus wanted to admit. "I wouldn't have—" "Yes, you would have," Sophia interrupted, and there was no malice in it, just certainty. You would have turned it into a problem to solve. You would have made spreadsheets and hired the best doctors and scheduled everything down to the minute. And you would have convinced yourself that doing those things meant you were present. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, because she was right. That's exactly what he would have done.
A child who had his eyes and his expressions and probably his stubborn determination. A child who was learning to speak and walk and laugh without Marcus there to witness any of it. He'd missed the pregnancy, the birth, the first smile, the first word, the first step. Every milestone that parents built their lives around, Marcus had traded them all for quarterly earnings reports and market share percentages, and he hadn't even known what he was sacrificing. That night, sleep didn't come. Marcus lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the encounter in his mind. Sophia's calm detachment, Eli's curious eyes, the way his son had waved goodbye without knowing who Marcus was. He just didn't know it was you. By dawn, Marcus had made several decisions. First, the proposal was off. He couldn't marry Victoria, not when his entire understanding of his own life had been revealed as fiction. Second, he was going to that park tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that if necessary. And third, perhaps most importantly, he was going to earn the right to be Eli's father, not by throwing money at the problem, not by hiring solutions, by showing up, by staying, by becoming someone worthy of that little boy's trust, even if it took the rest of his life. The transformation has begun, but the hardest part is just ahead. Subscribe now if you believe people can change, because Marcus's journey is far from over. The next afternoon arrived with the weight of 1,000 second chances. Marcus reached Lincoln Park 45 minutes early, a decision that surprised even him. The old Marcus Kane, the CEO who valued efficiency above all else, would have calculated arrival time to the minute, maximizing productivity elsewhere before showing up exactly when required. This Marcus sat on a bench near the playground, hands clasped between his knees, watching families interact with a focus that bordered on anthropological study. Fathers pushed children on swings with practiced ease. Mothers caught toddlers at the bottom of slides, laughing at sticky faces and grass-stained knees. Everyone moved with a casual intimacy that spoke of countless repetitions, routines so ingrained they'd become muscle memory. Marcus realized with sharp clarity he knew nothing about this world. He could negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts in his sleep. He could read market trends and predict competitor moves with uncanny accuracy. He could manage teams of hundreds and never miss a deadline. But he had no idea how to be a father. When Sophia appeared, pushing a stroller along the path, with Eli walking beside her, Marcus stood too quickly, then immediately felt foolish for the eagerness he couldn't hide. Eli noticed him first. The little boy stopped walking, his hand reaching up to tug on Sophia's jacket with urgent excitement. "That man!" Eli exclaimed, pointing directly at Marcus with the brutal honesty of toddlers. Sophia followed his gaze, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes," she said softly to Eli, "that's him." She approached slowly, giving Marcus space to stay where he was rather than rushing forward. When they stopped a few feet away, Sophia released the stroller handle and crossed her arms loosely, not hostile, but guarded. "You came. I said I would." Something flickered in Sophia's eyes, not quite approval, but acknowledgement. Eli studied Marcus with that same intense curiosity from yesterday, his head tilted slightly. Then, before Sophia could stop him, he took 2 bold steps forward. Marcus's breath caught. He knelt slowly, bringing himself to Eli's level without crowding him, his heart hammering so hard he was certain everyone in the park to hear it. "Hi," Marcus said gently, keeping his voice soft. "It's good to see you again." Eli considered him seriously. Then, with the devastating simplicity of childhood logic, "You came back." 2 words. Just 2 words, but they landed like an avalanche, burying Marcus under the weight of their implication. "You came back," as if Eli had been waiting, as if he'd expected Marcus might not. "Yes," Marcus managed, his voice rough. "I did." That seemed to satisfy Eli. He nodded solemnly, then turned and ran toward the playground with the singular focus of a child who'd spotted his favorite slide.
Marcus stood slowly, his legs unsteady. Sophia watched him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Over the next hour, Marcus received a crash course in toddler supervision. He learned that watching meant actually watching, not glancing up from a phone every few minutes. It meant tracking a small person who moved with alarming speed and creativity, who saw climbing opportunities where adults saw danger, who had zero concept of personal boundaries or social conventions. When Eli fell and scraped his knee, Marcus's instinct was immediately to assess the damage and call for medical attention. Sophia stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Watch," she said. She knelt beside Eli, who was already winding up for a proper cry. But instead of rushing to fix it, she simply held him, letting him cry against her shoulder while murmuring soft reassurances. "You're okay, baby. I know it hurts. Let it out." No frantic problem-solving, no attempts to distract or minimize, just presence. After a minute, Eli's sobs quieted to hiccups. Sophia pulled a small bandage from her bag, one covered in cartoon dinosaurs, and let Eli put it on. "Better?" she asked. Eli nodded, already forgetting the injury as he spotted a sandbox across the playground. Marcus watched this interaction with the intensity of a man studying a foreign language. "You didn't try to fix it," he observed quietly. "That's because it didn't need fixing. It needed acknowledgement. There's a difference." The lesson settled somewhere deep in Marcus's chest. Later, when Eli demanded that Marcus push him on the swing, Marcus approached it like a project, analyzing the optimal arc, the correct amount of force, the precise timing. "You're overthinking it," Sophia called from her spot on a nearby bench. Marcus glanced back at her, caught. "Just push him. He'll tell you if it's too much." So Marcus pushed, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as Eli shrieked with laughter. "Higher! Higher!" Marcus complied, watching his son's face light up with pure joy and feeling something crack open inside himself that he didn't know was sealed shut. When it was time to leave, Eli ran back to Marcus and without warning or ceremony, hugged his leg. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but Marcus felt it in every cell of his body. "Bye," Eli said simply, then took Sophia's hand and walked toward the parking lot without looking back. Marcus stood alone on the playground, his hands trembling slightly, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't name. Sophia paused at the edge of the park and turned back. "Same time next week?" she called. "Yes," Marcus replied immediately. "Or sooner, whenever you'll let me." Sophia's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "We'll see," she said again, but this time it sounded less like doubt and more like possibility. Marcus returned to his office Monday morning a different man. His assistant, Jennifer, immediately noticed. "Sir, you have back-to-back meetings starting in—" "Cancel the 2 o'clock," Marcus interrupted. Jennifer blinked, her tablet frozen mid-swipe. "But that's the investor call with—" "I know what it is. Reschedule it." "For when?" "I don't care. Just not between 1 and 4 on Wednesdays or weekends." Jennifer stared at him as if he'd announced he was joining a circus. "Are you feeling all right?" Marcus looked up from his computer, and for the first time in the 3 years Jennifer had worked for him, he smiled, actually smiled, with warmth rather than professional courtesy. "I'm fine, Jennifer. Better than fine, actually. I just have new priorities." Over the next few weeks, Marcus's calendar underwent a transformation that sent shockwaves through Kane Dynamics. The CEO, who once scheduled bathroom breaks, was suddenly blocking out entire afternoons marked simply personal. Board members complained, investors grumbled, competitors whispered that Marcus Kane was finally burning out. Marcus didn't care, because every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and every Saturday morning, and every Sunday afternoon, he was at Lincoln Park, or later at the Children's Museum or the aquarium, or simply at Sophia's modest apartment, helping Eli build block towers that the boy would immediately destroy with gleeful abandon. He learned Eli's routines, how he only ate dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets, how he needed his favorite blanket to sleep, how he became cranky around 7 p.m. if he hadn't napped. He learned Eli's personality, stubborn and curious, affectionate but independent, surprisingly thoughtful for someone so young. And slowly, terrifyingly, beautifully, Eli learned him. "Marcus," Eli said one afternoon, testing out the name with serious concentration. Marcus's heart clenched.
He'd been the man from the park for weeks. Hearing his actual name in that small voice felt like graduation. "Yes, buddy. You stay now." The question, so simple, so direct, nearly broke him. Marcus glanced at Sophia, who was watching from the kitchen doorway with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice thick. "I stay now." Eli nodded solemnly, then turned back to his coloring book as if he hadn't asked the most important question of Marcus's life. "He's been talking about the man from the park all morning, asking when he'd see you again," she said quietly. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. "I didn't know if you'd be here," Sophia continued, "but I told him he might be. I hope that wasn't a mistake." "It wasn't," Marcus said quickly. "I'm here. I'll keep being here." Sophia studied him for a long moment. "We'll see," she said, not unkindly, but with the caution of someone who'd learned not to trust promises.
The real turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Marcus's phone rang at 9:47 p.m., late enough that he knew immediately something was wrong. Sophia's name appeared on the screen. "Eli has a fever," she said without preamble, her voice tight with controlled panic. 103.5. "I'm taking him to the ER. I thought you should know." "I'm on my way," Marcus said, already grabbing his keys. "Marcus, you don't have to. I'm on my way." He made it to Chicago Children's Hospital in 17 minutes, breaking at least 6 traffic laws in the process. He found them in the pediatric emergency room, Eli limp and flushed in Sophia's arms, whimpering softly. Sophia looked exhausted and terrified, her hair disheveled, still wearing pajama pants under her coat. Marcus had never seen her look so vulnerable. "Any news?" he asked, sitting beside them. "Not yet. They're backed up." Sophia's voice cracked slightly. "He's never been this sick before. I don't know if I'm overreacting or—" "You're not," Marcus said firmly. "You did exactly right." They waited for 2 hours. Marcus didn't check his phone once, didn't think about the morning meeting he'd definitely miss, didn't calculate the cost of his time or worry about productivity. He just stayed. When Eli finally fell asleep against Sophia's shoulder, she began to cry quietly, the kind of exhausted tears that come when adrenaline finally drains away. Without thinking, Marcus put his arm around her, and Sophia let him. They sat like that for nearly an hour, Eli sleeping between them, Sophia's head eventually resting against Marcus's shoulder, the emergency room buzzing with controlled chaos around them. It was the closest Marcus had felt to family in his entire adult life. When the doctor finally called them back and confirmed it was just a bad virus that would pass, Sophia's relief was palpable, but she was also completely spent. "Let me drive you home," Marcus offered. For once, Sophia didn't argue. Marcus carried Eli to the car, the little boy barely stirring, his small body hot with fever against Marcus's chest. He strapped him carefully into the car seat in Sophia's old Honda, then drove them home while Sophia dozed in the passenger seat. At her apartment, Marcus carried Eli upstairs and laid him gently in his bed. He stayed until Sophia gave him medicine and Eli settled, his small hand wrapped around his mother's finger. "Thank you," Sophia whispered in the darkened hallway, "for coming, for staying." "Always," Marcus replied. "I meant what I said, Sophia. I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm starting to believe you," she admitted quietly. Marcus left that night, understanding something fundamental. Love wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about showing up at 9:47 p.m. when your child had a fever. It was about waiting in uncomfortable plastic chairs without complaint. It was about staying, even when, especially when, it was inconvenient. We're in the heart of the transformation now. Subscribe if you believe in the power of showing up, because what comes next will prove whether Marcus has truly changed. Don't miss it. The inevitable collision between Marcus's old life and new reality came exactly 3 months after that first encounter in Riverside Park. December brought Kane Dynamics' annual Investor Gala, the most important networking event of the year. 200 of Chicago's wealthiest and most influential people gathered at the Four Seasons to celebrate the company's continued dominance.
Marcus had attended every year since founding the company. His presence wasn't optional, it was expected. But this year, the gala fell on Eli's 3rd birthday. Marcus stood in his penthouse on the evening of December 18th, dressed in a $5,000 tuxedo, staring at his reflection with an unfamiliar feeling gnawing at his gut. His phone buzzed with increasingly urgent messages from his CFO. Investors asking where you are. Senator Wilkins wants to discuss the expansion. You need to be here. Marcus picked up his phone and typed a response. I'm not coming. He changed into jeans and a sweater, grabbed the enormous stuffed giraffe he'd bought, and drove to Sophia's apartment. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. Marcus, aren't you supposed to be? I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, he said simply. Behind her, Eli appeared, wearing a little birthday crown made of construction paper. Marcus! He shrieked, running forward and slamming into Marcus's legs with the full force of 3-year-old enthusiasm. Marcus scooped him up, and Eli immediately spotted the giraffe. Is that for me? Happy birthday, buddy. The joy on Eli's face made the dozen angry voicemails Marcus would definitely receive later completely, utterly worth it. That evening, Marcus sat on the floor of Sophia's small living room, eating pizza and birthday cake, playing toy trains, and singing off-key happy birthday. It was the best night of his life. Around 8 p.m., after Eli had fallen asleep mid-sentence with frosting still on his face, Sophia joined Marcus on the couch. You're going to pay for this at work, she said quietly. I know. Was it worth it? Marcus looked at the sleeping child, at the birthday decorations she'd clearly spent hours creating, at the life he'd almost missed entirely. Yes, he said without hesitation. It was worth everything. Sophia studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached over and took his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact since he'd walked back into her life. They sat like that in the soft glow of birthday candles, not speaking, just existing in a moment that felt like forgiveness beginning to take root.
The fallout at Kane Dynamics was immediate and severe. Monday morning, Marcus walked into a boardroom full of angry faces. You missed the investor gala, his CFO said coldly. Do you have any idea how that looked? I had a family obligation. You don't have a... The CFO stopped, confusion flickering across his face. What family? Marcus took a breath. He'd kept Eli secret from his professional world, instinctively protecting that fragile new relationship from the scrutiny and demands of his corporate life. But he realized now, hiding Eli was its own form of absence. I have a son, Marcus said simply. He turned 3 yesterday. I wasn't going to miss his birthday. Stunned silence filled the boardroom. Since when do you have a son? Someone finally asked. Since 2.5 years before I knew about him. And now that I do know, he's my priority. Not my only priority, but my first one. He looked around the table at men and women who'd built empires alongside him, who understood success as he once did. I'm not stepping down, but I am setting boundaries. No weekend work unless it's an emergency. No evening meetings past 6, and certain days are non-negotiable. That's not how you built this company, one of the board members said. No, I agreed, it's not, and that's exactly why I'm changing it. The meeting ended without resolution, tension thick in the air. But Marcus didn't waver. For the first time in his career, he understood. Losing everything professionally would hurt less than losing Eli. If you're feeling the weight of Marcus's choice, subscribe now, because the hardest test is still ahead, and not everyone will understand his transformation. Stay with us for the ending. Winter deepened, and with it, something between Marcus and Sophia began to thaw. It happened in small moments, Sophia laughing at one of Marcus's terrible dad jokes, Marcus bringing coffee exactly how she liked it without being asked, shared glances over Eli's head when he said something hilariously absurd. One evening in late January, after Eli had gone to bed, they found themselves talking longer than usual. I was so angry at you for so long, Sophia admitted, curled into the corner of her couch, not just for leaving, but for making me feel like love was something I had to earn through silence. Marcus felt the words cut deep,
but he didn't deflect. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to be present. I thought providing meant the same thing as caring. And now? Now I know that Eli doesn't care how much money I make. He cares whether I show up to push him on the swing, whether I remember that he likes his sandwiches cut into triangles, whether I'm there when he's scared or sick or just wants to show me a cool rock he found." Sophia's eyes glistened. "You really have changed." "I had to. The person I was would have lost everything that matters." A long silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted with possibility. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said finally. "Anything." "That woman you were going to propose to, what happened there?" Marcus had known this question would come eventually. "I ended it, the night I saw you in the park. I never even made it to the restaurant." "Do you regret it?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "No," he said, "because I would have been marrying her for all the wrong reasons. I thought I wanted a life that fit into neat compartments. But that's not love, that's convenience." "And what is love?" Sophia asked softly. Marcus met her eyes. "Love is showing up even when it's hard. It's staying when you could leave. It's choosing someone's well-being over your own comfort again and again until choosing them becomes as natural as breathing." Sophia's breath caught. "Is that what you're doing? Choosing us?" "Every single day." The air between them felt electric, charged with unspoken possibility. Sophia leaned forward slightly. Marcus did the same. But before their lips could meet, Eli's voice called from the bedroom, "Mommy, I had a bad dream." They pulled apart, the moment broken, but somehow not lost. Sophia smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Hold that thought," she whispered. Marcus waited on the couch while she comforted Eli, and he realized with startling clarity, this was what he wanted. Not the fantasy of perfect moments, but the reality of interrupted ones, the beautiful chaos of family, the way love existed in fever checks and birthday parties and bad dreams that needed soothing. When Sophia returned, she sat closer than before. "We should probably take this slow," she said. "Agreed," Marcus replied, but they were both smiling. Spring arrived with unexpected warmth, as if the world itself was celebrating new beginnings. Marcus had been in Eli's life for 6 months now. Enough time for routines to become rituals, for presents to become expected, for the man from the park to become simply Marcus. But one question remained unasked, hovering between them like a promise waiting to be spoken. When would Marcus become Daddy? Sophia had never pushed it. Neither had Marcus, too afraid of claiming a title he wasn't sure he'd earned. But Eli, in his 3-year-old wisdom, made the decision for them. It happened on an ordinary Saturday at the zoo. They were watching the penguins, Eli's favorites, when a little girl beside them pointed and shouted, "Daddy, look!" Eli turned to Marcus with sudden, serious intensity. "Marcus?" "Yeah, buddy?" "Are you my daddy?" Time stopped. Marcus felt Sophia tense beside him, her hand instinctively reaching for his. He knelt down so he was eye level with Eli. "Do you want me to be?" Marcus asked gently. Eli considered this with the gravity of someone making a monumental decision. "Will you leave again?" The question shattered something in Marcus's chest. "Never," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, Eli, I will never leave you again." Eli studied his face, those brown eyes, Marcus's eyes, searching for truth. Then, with the simple faith of childhood, "Okay, you can be my daddy." Marcus pulled him into a hug, his throat too tight to speak. Over Eli's shoulder, he saw Sophia crying silently, her hand pressed to her mouth. When Marcus finally pulled back, Eli patted his cheek with small fingers. "Don't be sad, Daddy. The penguins are funny. Look!" And just like that, the most important moment of Marcus's life became just another moment in a day full of them. If your heart is full right now, subscribe, because we're not done yet. The final chapter will show you what redemption really looks like. Don't miss this ending.
6 months later, Marcus stood in the bathroom of his penthouse packing the last of his belongings into boxes. He was moving. Not to a bigger penthouse, not to a flashier address, to a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a backyard big enough for a playset. 2 blocks away from Sophia and Eli's apartment. Kane Dynamics had survived his transformation, barely. He'd handed over daily operations to his COO and stepped back to a consulting role, still involved, still invested, but no longer consumed. His net worth had decreased by 40%. He'd never been happier. The doorbell rang. When Marcus opened it, Eli stood there holding a marker drawing. "I made this for your new house," he announced proudly. It was a stick-figure family, 3 people holding hands under a rainbow. "I love it," Marcus said, his throat tight. "It's going on the refrigerator first thing." Behind Eli, Sophia stood with her arms crossed, smiling. She'd cut her hair shorter. She looked lighter somehow, as if she'd finally let down a weight she'd carried for too long. "Need help moving?" she offered. "Always," Marcus replied. They worked together that afternoon, carrying boxes and assembling furniture while Eli helped by getting in the way and making them laugh. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, they sat together on the back porch Marcus had bought specifically for moments like this. Eli had fallen asleep in Marcus's lap, exhausted from the excitement. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said softly. "Anything. Do you ever regret it, the life you gave up?" He looked at the sleeping child in his arms, at the woman beside him who'd given him a second chance he'd never deserved, and the modest house that held more meaning than his penthouse ever had. "Not for a single second," he said. Sophia leaned her head against his shoulder. "Good," she whispered, "because you're stuck with us now." "Promise?" Marcus asked, a smile in his voice. "Promise." They sat like that as the stars began to emerge, 3 people who'd found their way back to each other through the hardest possible path. Marcus thought about the man he'd been a year ago, so certain of his direction, so convinced that conquest equaled success, so blind to what actually mattered. That man would never have noticed the child in the park. That man would have driven past, towards a proposal that would have been the worst mistake of his life. But that man no longer existed. In his place was someone new, someone who understood that love couldn't be scheduled or optimized or managed, someone who'd learned that the most important things in life were the ones you couldn't control, someone who finally knew what it meant to stay. 5 years later, Marcus Kane stood in the kitchen of the house he shared with his family, because that's what they'd become, slowly and carefully through years of choosing each other every single day. Sophia had moved in 3 years ago. They'd gotten married 2 years ago, in a small ceremony at the park where it all began. And now Eli, 8 years old and sharp as ever, was explaining quantum physics to his 2-year-old sister Maya, who listened with absolute seriousness despite understanding approximately 0% of what his brother was saying. "You know she has no idea what you're talking about, right?" Marcus asked, flipping pancakes. "She will eventually," Eli replied confidently. "I'm planting seeds." Sophia laughed from where she was packing lunches, and Marcus felt that familiar swell of gratitude that hit him at least once a day. "Remember when you could barely work a coffee maker?" Sophia teased. "I evolved," Marcus said with mock dignity. "You burned toast yesterday." "Okay, I'm evolving slowly." Eli came over and hugged Marcus's waist. Casual, easy, the kind of affection that came from years of trust. "I love you, Dad," he said simply. "Dad." It never got old. "I love you too, buddy." Marcus ruffled his hair. As they sat down for breakfast together, the morning light streaming through windows Marcus had chosen specifically for this moment, he thought about the journey that had brought him here, about the man he'd been a year ago, so certain of success meant conquest, about the moment in Riverside Park that shattered every certainty, about the slow, painful, beautiful process of learning that showing up was more important than having all the answers. Real love wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. It was about staying when leaving would have been easier. It was about becoming someone worthy of trust one day at a time. Marcus once believed he had no children. He'd been catastrophically wrong. But more importantly, he'd been given a chance to become right. And he'd taken it. Not because it was easy, not because it fit his plans, but because some things, the most important things, were worth rebuilding your entire life around. As breakfast dissolved into the beautiful chaos of family mornings, with syrup spills and sibling negotiations and the constant hum of love that sounded like noise but felt like home, Marcus understood with perfect clarity. This was success. This was what mattered. This was everything. If this story touched your heart, subscribe now, because life is full of second chances, but only if we're brave enough to take them. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Thank you for staying until the end. Your presence mattered, just like showing up always does.